All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children, men will die for their wives and children, and God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts, the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Quitting vice? Drop smoking, avoid alcohol, shun gambling, and virtue virtus. Written by Conrad Riker. Available now. Links in description. The genocentric guillotine, weaponizing the trivium to crush the respect scam and the Marxist war on male biology. You have been betrayed by a culture that despises you, a genocentric conspiracy framing your biological reality as a pathology and your desire for truth as a hate crime. The modern world demands you remain an automaton, numb to the pain of a system that steals your labor, trivializes your suffering, and mocks your very existence under the guise of equity. I write to you not as a victim, but as a fellow soldier in the war for the Western soul, armed with the trivium of logic, rhetoric, and grammar to dismantle the leftist dogmas that have enslaved your mind. We are done with the sugar-coated lies of feminism and the Marxist inversion of the transcendentals. It is time to reclaim the virtus, the manliness of the virtue of manliness, by looking the beast in the eye and laughing at its absurdity. Consider the cruel theater of modern dating, where making him wait is not a boundary, but a transactional compliance test, a hypergamic strategy to secure beta provision before granting alpha access. This is the same mechanism that demands you endure deep conversations which are nothing more than ideological litmus tests to ensure you are a pliable, emasculated drone. Meanwhile, the corporate state, fueled by your sacrifice, uses cultural Marxism to erode the hierarchy of competence, leaving you to self-medicate with alcohol, gambling, and tobacco just to feel a fleeting sense of control over a life engineered to keep you weak and disposable. This manifesto is your weapon to smash the idols of woke Babylon, to expose the gender empathy gap, and to reject the post-hegemonic void where feelings replace facts. We will deconstruct the evolutionary biology of these lies and present the irrefutable data on male suicide, workplace fatalities, and the institutional war on the male body. By the time we are finished, you will not only see the matrix for what it is, but you will possess the strength to quit the vices that weaken you and embrace the stoic, transcendent spirit that built the greatest civilization in history. The game is rigged, but the player is waking up. The sham of respect, weaponized delay, and the emotional gauntlet. Are you man enough to handle a deep conversation? This query, dripping with the faux intellectuality of a gender studies major, is not a request for philosophical discourse. It is a biological booby trap. When a woman poses this challenge, she is not seeking your command of dialectics or your familiarity with the canon. She is initiating a screening mechanism for ideological conformity. Evolutionarily, this is a shit test to ensure you are not a psychopath, but in our modern Babylon of woke, it has mutated into a compliance audit. She is checking if your emotional frame is porous enough for her to inject her chaotic subjectivity without you resisting. If you answer with logic, you fail. If you answer with stoic dismissal, you are labeled emotionally unavailable. The only acceptable answer is the one that submits to the primacy of her feelings over your facts. This is the essence of the emotional gauntlet, a ritual designed to filter out high-value men who refuse to compromise their reason, trapping only those willing to update their intellectual sovereignty for the chance at sexual access. Let us dismantle the fraudulent currency of respect in this context. The modern gynocentric order demands men respect a woman's boundaries, time, and sacred emotional space. Yet, it actively disrespects the male biological imperative by trivializing his sexual needs as creepy or predatory until validated by female approval. This is a double bind of the highest order. Male desire is pathologized as a defect to be managed rather than a drive to be celebrated. She demands the reverence due to a goddess, but offers the regard one gives to a useful appliance. This is the linguistic shift exposed by the trivium. In the grammar of the matriarchy, respect has ceased to mean high regard and now functions as a synonym for subjugation. You are commanded to respect her refusal to engage, while your refusal to tolerate her nonsense is framed as harassment. It is a rigged game where the house always wins, and the house is built on the foundation of female solipsism. We must acknowledge that female testing is a biological constant, as unchangeable as gravity, yet modern culture has weaponized it into psychological abuse. In a rational society, a woman testing a man functioned as a playful dominance hierarchy ritual, an interplay where the male demonstrated his capacity to protect and provide by maintaining composure under pressure. Currently, owing to the corrosive decay of feminism, this ritual has been supplanted by a campaign of attrition. The test is no longer "can you handle me?" but "how much degradation can you withstand before you break?" It is not a sieve for strength, it is a hunt for a compliant drone. When you face a woman who deliberately generates chaos to see if you can handle it, realize that you are observing a biological imperative commandeered by a cultural Marxist pathology aiming to emasculate you before you even reach the altar. Consider the tactic of making him wait. I recall a comrade of mine, a rational man with a solid career, who was told by a single mother of 3 that they needed to wait 6 months to build trust before intimacy. This was not about virtue, it was a negotiation. Deconstruct this lie, and you see the hypergamic anxiety on full display. She was not guarding her heart, she was securing beta provision. By withholding the sexual market value she had readily dispensed to the bad boys in her 20s, she was attempting to auction off her depreciating assets to the highest bidder of commitment. The wait is a compliance test rooted in the fear that if she gives away the milk for free, no one will buy the cow. It is a desperate transactional leverage play to extract resources from a man she knows instinctively is out of her league. Framed as a noble quest for respect, we can render this reality down to a simple syllogism. Premise 1. If a woman withholds intimacy as a reward for specific behaviors, financial investment, time, emotional labor, the exchange is transactional. Premise 2. A transaction where sexual access is traded for resources or compliance is the definition of prostitution. Conclusion. Therefore, a relationship predicated on making him wait to ensure he has invested enough is not a partnership of equals. It is a vain form of negotiation with a high-priced call girl. Minus the honesty of the original contract, there is no romance in the transaction, only the cold, hard calculus of the sexual marketplace. I watched a friend walk into the deep conversation trap, and the results were predictable. He sat across from a highly educated woman who began to rant about the wage gap using pure emotional sentiment. He, thinking he was engaging in a debate of equals, pulled out the raw data adjusted for hours worked and career choices and dismantled her argument with the precision of a surgeon. Her reaction? She did not concede to the facts. She burst into tears, accused him of invalidating her lived experience, and promptly ghosted him. This proves the demand for feelings over facts is absolute. The deep conversation is a minefield where logic is the enemy, and any attempt to rescue her from her own ignorance with truth results in immediate ostracization. You cannot use a map of the terrain, logic, to guide someone who believes the terrain should rearrange itself to suit their feelings, feminism. The solution, gentlemen, is to reclaim the frame and seize your temporal authority. You must stop playing the wait game. When a woman attempts to delay your gratification to secure your investment, you must counteroffer with a demand for a return on investment immediately. Refuse to pay the price of admission for a product that has shown clear signs of wear and tear. We must use the rhetoric of the West to speak these truths. Time is the one resource you cannot get back. If she demands you invest months of your life without proof of concept, she is robbing you. Reject the weaponized delay. Refuse the emotional gauntlet. Enforce the boundary of your own reality, and watch as the illusion of her respect shatters, revealing the desperate solipsistic child underneath. Only then can you interact with truth unmediated by the feminist narrative. But do not mistake the pickpocket for the architect of the prison. The feminist's demand for your temporal submission is merely a symptom of a far more pervasive rot, a systemic plague designed to dissolve your distinctiveness into the machinery of the state. We must widen our gaze from the interpersonal skirmish to the civilizational war, for the true enemy seeks to turn your very life into a commodity to be spent. The automaton of alienation from's nightmare and the capitalist cage. Consider the clock on the wall, ticking away the finite seconds of your life, a mechanical drumbeat to a song you did not compose. Erich Fromm, that keen observer of the human condition, famously described the modern man as an automaton, a creature who has ceased to be himself and has become a function, a cog in the great grinding gears of the economic machine. You feel this in your bones, don't you? That hollow sensation when you sit at the desk, the steering wheel, or the workbench performing the same repetitive motion for the 10,000th time. This is not merely the boredom of labor. It is the very death of the soul. The system has stripped you of your creative essence, your distinctiveness and your will, replacing them with a scripted role designed to service a debt you never signed up for. We are told from birth that we must find our place in the workforce. Yet the reality is that the workforce has found its place in us, colonizing our minds and extracting our labor to fuel a globalist Ponzi scheme that cares nothing for the individual man, only for the aggregate yield. We are alienated not just from the product of our labor, but from our very selves, wandering through a neon-lit fog where our deepest biological drives are suppressed by the synthetic requirements of the market. It is a profound irony, the joke of cosmic cruelty played by the leftists who claim to be the champions of the proletariat, that the very mechanisms they decry as oppressive are the tools they wield to shackle the human spirit. The Marxist lie that capitalism is the primary oppressor is a sleight of hand, a distraction trick to keep your eyes off the real ball. Cultural Marxism does not seek to destroy the industrial machine, it seeks to weaponize it. It utilizes the efficiency of capitalism to enforce a crushing social conformity, demanding that you not only produce widgets but also adhere to a rigid contradictory dogma of equity and inclusion. The corporation is no longer interested in your profit margin, it is interested in your compliance. They have fused the tyranny of the boardroom with the pathology of the sociology department, creating a cage where your utility is measured not by your output, but by your willingness to parrot the lies of the day. You are being farmed, your potential harvested to sustain a system that views your masculinity as a defect to be managed rather than a force to be harnessed. Is it any wonder then that we turn to vice? Look at the man who stumbles out of the bar at 2 a.m., or the one glued to the slot machine, feeding it paper notes like a sacrament. The modern psychiatric complex will tell you he has a disease, a genetic flaw, a moral failing. I tell you he is fighting a war for his own dopamine receptors. In a world where every aspect of his life is managed, scheduled, and optimized by the collective, smoking a cigarette, drinking a bottle of cheap whiskey, or placing a risky bet becomes a desperate, pathetic, yet noble attempt to reclaim agency. It is a scream of biological defiance against a system that demands he be a docile unit of production. The vice is not the problem. It is the symptom, the frantic clawing at the walls of the prison cell by a man who realizes he has been locked in. The chemical rush is the only time he feels like the master of his own fate. A fleeting moment of sovereignty in a life defined by servitude. The system numbs you with bread and circuses, so you numb yourself with poison just to feel something real. This leads us to the wicked evolutionary biology of the leftist project, a project that fundamentally misunderstands the nature of the male beast. They frame male ambition, our desire to build, conquer, and achieve as toxic masculinity, a pathology to be cured with sensitivity training and gender studies. Yet, simultaneously, they rely entirely on that same suppressed ambition to keep the lights on. The welfare state, the bloated bureaucracy that replaces fathers and husbands with government checks, is fueled by the very testosterone they despise. They demand male labor to sustain a society that actively disenfranchises men. They tell the young man his natural aggression is sinful, then tax him to pay the police who arrest him for acting on it. It is a parasitic relationship. The feminine imperative, codified into law and culture, demands the protection and provision of the male while stripping him of the authority that traditionally accompanied those duties. You are the draft animal for the gynocentric plow, whipped for straying from the furrow and eventually slaughtered when you can no longer pull the weight. You see this played out tragically in the phenomenon of the layaway husband. This is the man who buys into the consumerist trap hook, line, and sinker, believing that if he accumulates enough status signaling goods, the leased luxury car, the oversized mortgage in the good school district, the designer handbags for the wife, he will purchase happiness and respect. He is working himself into an early grave to sustain a standard of living that is not for him, but for the image of the family unit required by the social contract. He is paying for his own disposability. The statistics are brutal and unavoidable. The divorce courts are not merely unfair. They are a systematic dismantling of the male entity. With roughly 70 to 80% of divorces initiated by women, and family courts awarding primary custody to the mother over 80% of the time. The layaway husband discovers too late that his sacrifice was not an investment, but a donation he worked to build a cage he was eventually locked out of, watching his wealth transfer to the very system that told him his provider role was his highest calling. We must dismantle the logical fallacies that uphold this nightmare, specifically the straw man argument feminism employs against the patriarchy. They attack a phantom, a cartoonish villain of male oppression that never truly existed in the way they describe, while ignoring that the capitalist system they claim to hate is fueled by the blood and sweat of male sacrifice. They ignore that the infrastructure they use to scream their grievances, the internet, the electricity, the smartphone, was built and maintained by men. They claim the patriarchy keeps women down, yet in the same breath, they demand that the patriarchy fix the potholes and rescue the burning buildings. The feminist argument is a house of cards built on a foundation of envy and falsehood, designed to extract resources from men under the guise of justice. They do not want equality. They want the fruits of your labor without the labor itself, a transfer of wealth from the competent to the complaining, justified by a history rewritten to fit their victim narrative. Furthermore, we must identify and reject the pathological altruism of the left, which is nothing more than a high-minded word for theft. They use empathy as a weapon, a bludgeon to dispossess you of the fruits of your hard work, under the guise of equity and social justice. They tell you that your success is unearned, a product of privilege, and therefore you owe it to the collective to give it up. This is the logic of the cuckoo bird, laying its eggs in your nest and pushing you out to freeze in the cold while it raises its young on your resources. It is a biological error, a mutation in the social code that, if left unchecked, will result in the extinction of the productive class. Do not mistake their tears for compassion. They are the crocodile tears of a predator preparing to strike. The welfare state does not love you, it eats you. The only remedy is to reject the consumerist trap entirely and prioritize assets and autonomy over the hollow status that attracts the wrong kind of female attention. Stop buying things you don't need to impress people who don't like you. When you spend your money on status symbols, you are signaling to the hypergamous female that you are a resource to be mined, not a partner to be respected. Shift your focus to acquiring assets, land, capital, skills, physical strength that give you independence. A man who needs nothing from the system is a man who cannot be controlled. By withdrawing your labor and your attention from the economy of vice and consumerism, you starve the beast. You reclaim your agency not through the needle or the bottle, but through the cold, hard logic of self-preservation and the cultivation of the Western virtues of stoicism and rationality. break the automaton programming. The cage is open, but you have to be the one to walk out. I have exposed the economic chains and chemical shackles used to reduce you to an automaton, yet recognize that this physical imprisonment is merely a symptom of a far more sinister spiritual severing. The architects of your misery know that a man who stands on the shoulders of giants cannot be easily dominated, so they have launched a total war on the foundation beneath your feet. You are not just a victim of theft, you are the target of a premeditated campaign to delete your history. The post-hegemonic void, Beasley-Murray, and the collapse of the cultural canon. Did you know that over the last decade, nearly 800 statues, monuments, and plaques across the United States alone have been taken down, moved, or renamed per the Southern Poverty Law Center's Whose Names Project? This systematic erasure isn't about fixing historical wrongs, it's about cutting your link to greatness. When they topple statues of Columbus, tear down Jefferson, and rename everything from schools to streets, they are executing what amounts to spiritual genocide against men like us who need heroes to look up to. The leftist dogma demands the complete destruction of the past because they realize a man with ancestors is dangerous to their agenda. They aim to leave you isolated, atomized, and ancestorless, drifting in a void where the only direction comes from corporate-approved influences and gender-neutral textbooks. This isn't progress. It is a calculated strategy to render you defenseless against their manufactured reality. Look at how they've systematically dismantled the concept of objective truth itself. What they call post-hegemony, that academic gibberish championed by theorists like Beasley-Murray, is really just a fancy way of describing the dissolution of logical authority into a swamp of feelings and performative victimhood. In their world, whoever can present the most pitiful narrative wins, regardless of facts. This is why they've replaced the transcendentals, good, true, and beautiful, with their demonic inversions, equity, my truth, and ugliness. They've made virtue signaling the new currency, while genuine virtue has been banished from public discourse. It's no coincidence that suicide rates among men in Western countries have skyrocketed by 62% over the last 3 decades. We've been systematically stripped of the cultural anchors that once gave our lives meaning. The solution lies in rediscovering the trivium: logic, rhetoric, grammar. These 3 disciplines formed the foundation of Western education for over 1,000 years because they train the mind to see through deception. Grammar gives you the tools to define terms precisely, so they can't shift the goalposts mid-argument. Logic teaches you to identify fallacies. Their arguments crumble under the weight of their own inconsistencies. Rhetoric arms you with the persuasive power to counter their emotional manipulations. When you master the trivium, you become immune to their mind viruses. You can slice through their propaganda like a hot knife through butter. It's the ultimate weapon against the confusion that plagues our post-hegemonic landscape. Consider what happens when we reject the Western canon. They tell you it's about diversity and inclusion, but it's actually a regression to a primitive tribal state, where truth doesn't matter, only narratives do. In tribal societies, the loudest voice or most charismatic leader wins regardless of facts. That's exactly what we see today. Twitter mobs canceling scientists who dare to present data contradicting the preferred narrative. The rejection of Western civilization's intellectual heritage isn't evolution, it's devolution. We're trading thousands of years of accumulated wisdom for the fleeting approval of emotional adolescents masquerading as moral arbiters. Beasley-Murray's theory of post-hegemony attempts to explain this phenomenon as the dissolution of power structures. But what he's really describing is the transition from organized, hierarchical authority to a chaotic, diffused form of tyranny. When authority becomes diffuse, it becomes insidious. It's everywhere and nowhere at once, embedded in algorithms, HR policies, and social norms that cannot be challenged because there's no clear adversary. This is why men feel suffocated despite being technically free. Power has been reconfigured into invisible constraints enforced through social credit systems and emotional blackmail. The woke regime represents the ultimate inversion of Western values. They've replaced the good with equity, forcing equal outcomes rather than recognizing merit. They've substituted the true with subjectivity, making reality subordinate to feelings. And they've perverted the beautiful by celebrating ugliness, calling it body positivity, while simultaneously mocking traditional standards of beauty. It's not an accident, it's deliberate subversion. They know that by destroying the transcendentals, they destroy the framework that allows men to aspire upward toward greatness. When nothing is objectively good, true, or beautiful, there's no reason to strive for anything beyond immediate gratification. We're witnessing the same decadence that destroyed Rome, but with a technological twist. Their bread and circuses have been upgraded to digital distractions and dopamine hits from social media. The Roman Senate became a rubber stamp for emperors, just as our institutions now rubber stamp leftist ideologies. The Roman mob demanded free entertainment. Today's mob demands free validation and safe spaces. Both civilizations collapsed when virtue was abandoned for comfort. The difference? Our collapse is accelerated by technology, giving us less time to course correct before the barbarians breach the gates. Critical theory's most insidious fallacy is its appeal to authority based on victimhood status. According to this twisted logic, the marginalized are always right, simply because they're marginalized, regardless of evidence or logical consistency. It's a mathematical impossibility. Being victimized doesn't confer infallibility. Yet this fallacy underpins their entire argumentative strategy. When you present them with facts about the 80% female primary custody rate in family courts despite fathers being equally fit parents, they dismiss it as patriarchy propaganda because it contradicts their narrative. They've constructed a closed system where their conclusions are never wrong, which is why their arguments are circular and unassailable by traditional logic. The path forward requires reclaiming our intellectual heritage. We must resurrect the living spirit of Western civilization, not out of nostalgia, but because it works. It's the system that produced the greatest explosion of human potential in history. The scientific method, the concept of individual rights, the Renaissance masterpieces. This is what they stole from us while we were distracted by sports, pornography, and the pursuit of hollow status symbols. By returning to these foundations, we can rebuild the framework that makes virtue both recognizable and achievable. It's time to stop apologizing for Western civilization and start defending it with the same ferocity our ancestors defended their lands. This brutal calculus of male expendability does not end at the factory gates or the construction site. It permeates every fiber of our culture, rotting it from the core. The gynocentric narrative demands we weep for imaginary slights, while ignoring the actual blood spilled by men who built the very civilization now being weaponized against them. This is not mere oversight. It is calculated cruelty masquerading as social justice. I have seen how the system grinds men down, treats their pain as pathology, and then offers poison as cure. The truth is undeniable, yet it is systematically buried beneath mountains of Marxist filth. The invisible agony, the institutional war on the male body. Look at the cold, hard numbers and weep for the forgotten sons of the West, because the system assuredly will not. We are fed a ceaseless diet of grievance propaganda regarding the so-called wage gap. Yet the true chasm, the empathy gap, remains a gaping wound in our civilization's fabric that the gynocentric order refuses to stitch. Consider the grim reality of the workplace. While you hear endless wailing regarding the lack of female CEOs, men account for roughly 93% of all workplace fatalities. These are not statistics. They are fathers, brothers, and sons crushed in mines, falling from skyscrapers, and electrocuted on power lines, their blood acting as the lubricant for society's machinery. When a man dies on the job, his death is treated as a statistical inevitability, a rounding error in the GDP, a mere malfunction of a disposable utility. If the genders were reversed and women were dying at these rates, the world would stop spinning. But because the victims are men, the silence is deafening. This institutional disregard stands as the clearest proof that the current hierarchy views male suffering not as a tragedy, but as a necessary operational cost. This calculated apathy extends into the very medical establishments that are sworn to heal us, revealing a cruelty so profound it borders on the sadistic. Take the case of prostate cancer versus breast cancer funding. Breast cancer, while undeniably a terrible affliction, receives vastly disproportionate funding compared to prostate cancer. despite prostate cancer killing almost exactly the same number of men annually as breast cancer kills women. In many years, the disparity in research funding is astronomical, with breast cancer initiatives often outspending prostate cancer research by a factor of 4 or 5 to 1. This is not a matter of medical priority, it is a matter of political priority and a blatant display of the cruelty and deceit inherent in a resource allocation model driven by feminist narrative control. The message is unmistakable. The male body is a vector of utility, and when that vector malfunctions or rots, it is a nuisance to be managed, not a crisis to be solved. Your life, quite literally, is valued less by the state and the corporate complex than the comfort of the collective female demographic. To maintain this grotesque status quo, the architects of our decline have weaponized psychology, specifically through the insidious concept of toxic masculinity. This narrative is nothing more than a sophisticated gaslighting operation designed to pathologize the natural male response to agony. When a man faces the relentless pressure of providing, protecting, and enduring in a world that hates him, he adopts stoicism. He grits his teeth and bears the burden. This is not a disorder, this is the essence of virtus. Yet, the cultural Marxists and their leftist lackeys label this primal necessary strength as a pathology to be cured by pharmaceuticals or therapy sessions. By diagnosing the masculine refusal to complain as a mental defect, they attempt to chemically castrate the male spirit, turning the warrior into a compliant, emotional consumer unit who is easier to control, exploit, and ultimately discard. This virtue signaling of the left is merely a mask, a velvet glove covering an iron fist of deep-seated hatred for the biological male form. They despise the raw physical potential of the male body because it represents the ultimate threat to their egalitarian delusions. They seek to feminize, not to nurture, but to prevent the rise of a rival hierarchy. They understand deep down that a man connected to his physical power is a man who cannot be easily ruled. This is why they push the soy boy aesthetic and demonize testosterone. They are pruning the garden of competition so that their weak collective ideology can survive without being choked out by the strong, beautiful oak of Western masculinity. They fear the virile male because the virile male does not need the state to be his father. He creates his own destiny. However, let us flip the script on this suffering. Schopenhauer correctly identified suffering as the fundamental nature of existence. But for the man who embraces virtus, the man of manly virtue, this suffering transforms from a burden into a forge. The agony you feel is the friction of your soul against the chains of a dying civilization. It is noble. It is transformative. The pain is not a signal to retreat into a bottle of beer or a pack of cigarettes. It is a clarion call to sharpen your mind and harden your body. The world will try to break you, but if you accept the struggle, you become harder than the stones upon which they seek to crush you. Your suffering is the evidence of your resistance. Therefore, the most radical act of rebellion you can commit against this Babylon of woke is to reclaim your physical sovereignty by rejecting the chemical chains of vice. Alcohol and smoking are the tools of the oppressor. Pacifiers used to numb the male mind and rot the male body, leaving you pliant and weak for the slaughter. You cannot be the hero of your own story if you are intoxicated or wheezing. By purging these poisons from your life, you are not just improving your health, you are declaring that your physical vessel is sacred, that it is the last stronghold of truth in a world of lies. Quitting vice is the ultimate assertion of ownership over yourself. They can take your job, they can corrupt your culture, and they can lie about your history, but they cannot take your vitality unless you willingly hand it to them. In the end, the only thing the system truly fears is a sober, strong, and spiritually awake man who refuses to break. You have walked through the fire of the modern lie and emerged with your sight intact, seeing the world not as the benevolent illusion the woke architects sold you, but as the brutal, beautiful hierarchy it truly is. We have dissected the make-him-wait con job, revealing it for the hypergamic leverage scam it is. And we have exposed Fromm's alienation for what it is. A system that grinds your bones to dust, while a culture ignores that 93% of workplace fatalities are men. You see now that the bottle, the slot machine, and the cigarette were not your friends, but the chains supplied by a system that despises your potential and fears your strength, seeking to pacify the very virtus that could burn it all down. By casting aside the vices that dull the mind and weaken the flesh, you reclaim your biological imperative to build, protect, and conquer. You stop being the layaway husband working himself into an early grave for a family court system that strips fathers of their children in over 80% of custody battles. And you start becoming the sovereign architect of your own destiny. The statistics on male suicide don't have to be your eulogy. Armed with the logic of the trivium and the transcendentals of truth and beauty, you possess the only weaponry capable of shattering the emotional fallacies of the left. This is your mandate, to live so powerfully and clearly that your very existence acts as a rebuke to the degenerate lies of cultural Marxism. Do not keep this knowledge buried. Spend it freely. Share these truths with your brothers still trapped in the matrix and watch their eyes light up as the chains fall away. You are the vanguard of the West, the resistance against the void, and the only force capable of turning back the tide. Go forth and be magnificent. And now the sponsored book introduction: Quitting Vice. Drop smoking, avoid alcohol, shun gambling, and virtue virtus. You ever stand in front of the mirror after a smoke? Look at your yellow teeth, your shallow breathing, and wonder how the hell you got here. I have. I've stood there with a cigarette in one hand and a beer in the other, feeling like a fraud in my own skin. I was a man built for battle, college athlete, combat trainer, father, but I was losing to a fucking tobacco company. Not because I was weak, because I was lied to. I was told that quitting meant being reasonable, that I should ease into it, that I needed therapy, support groups, patches, gum, apps. Bullshit. I needed a war plan. And that's what this book is, a war plan. Not for some sensitive soul looking to feel better, but for men who know they're being manipulated by chemicals, by culture, by a system that profits from our decline. This isn't therapy, this is reprogramming. I've spent years studying evolutionary biology, male psychology, behavioral conditioning, and real-world combat, both physical and social. I've trained men who've survived war zones, prisons, and abusive relationships. I've seen what real strength looks like, and I've seen what happens when that strength is eroded by vice. Smoking isn't just a bad habit. It's a symptom of a deeper sickness, a culture that wants men docile, dependent, and disconnected from their primal power. Alcohol, gambling, junk food, bad sleep, fake media narratives, they're all part of the same attack vector. They're designed to keep you small, tired, and easy to control. And if you're still smoking, you're already halfway there. This book isn't for everyone. If you're one of those people who believes masculinity is toxic, that men should apologize for their strength, or that vulnerability is some kind of virtue, shut this book now. Go write poetry. Join a feeling circle. Watch TED Talks about emotional intelligence. This isn't for you. This is for men who've had enough. Men who know they were built for more than sitting on a couch, numbing themselves with nicotine and Netflix. Men who understand that biology isn't bigotry, it's destiny. That testosterone isn't a curse, it's your edge. That fatherhood, fitness, discipline, and dominance aren't outdated concepts, they're survival tools. Inside, you'll learn how nicotine hijacks your dopamine system like a hostile takeover. How the state taxes you into addiction while pretending to care about your health. How modern culture laughs at real men while demanding we carry the weight of society. You'll learn why cold turkey isn't cruel. It's the only way real men quit. Why brotherhood isn't about sharing feelings, it's about holding each other accountable. Why fitness isn't vanity, it's warfare. And why your legacy, what you leave behind for your sons and daughters, matters more than the next puff. I didn't write this book to sell you hope. I wrote it to give you a weapon, the same one I used to quit for good, the same one I've used to rebuild my body, my mind, and my life. You don't need motivation, you need a mission. And this book gives you one, to stop being a slave to your cravings and start being a sovereign man. If you're ready to fight, if you're tired of being weak but still smoking, then keep reading. If not, close this book. Go back to your comfort zone, but don't pretend you're not choosing weakness. Quitting Vice, Drop Smoking, Avoid Alcohol, Shun Gambling, and Virtue Virtus. Written by Conrad Riker. Buy now, links in description.